He married a disabled woman unaware she's the heiress of a billion-dollar conglomerate. She sat quietly in a worn-out wheelchair on the sidewalk, her caramel-toned skin glowing under the street lamp. He never expected the woman he pitied would one day become the owner of everything he thought he could never have. Have you ever loved someone without knowing who they truly were? Let us know in the comments if you've ever been surprised by someone's hidden strength. Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful story family. I would be glad to know that these lessons get to people in different parts of the world, so please let me know where you're watching from. And hey, thank you for being part of this amazing, growing community. Your support, your comments, your engagement, it all means the world to us. Let's begin. Rain hammered the pavement, a relentless drumbeat that drowned out the hum of the city. Bryce hunched under his jacket, the collar turned up against the downpour, his boots splashing through shallow puddles as he trudged home from the auto shop. The streetlights flickered, casting jagged reflections on the wet asphalt, and the world felt like it was shrinking under the weight of the storm. He was 3 blocks from his apartment when he saw her, a figure slumped against a lamppost, her wheelchair tilted awkwardly, one wheel sagging uselessly against the curb. He slowed, squinting through the rain. She was soaked, her dark hair plastered to her face, her hands gripping the arms of the chair as if she could will it to move. A thin jacket clung to her shoulders, doing little to shield her from the deluge. Bryce hesitated. It wasn't his business. He could keep walking, get home, crack open a beer, and forget the whole thing. But something about the way she sat there, alone, defiant despite the circumstances, tugged at him. He adjusted his cap and crossed the street. "Hey," he called over the roar of the rain, his voice rough from a day of shouting over engines. "You okay?" She looked up, her eyes sharp despite the water streaming down her face. For a moment she didn't answer, just studied him like she was weighing whether he was worth the effort. Then she tilted her head, a faint curve tugging at her lips. "Does it look like I'm okay?" Bryce snorted, wiping rain from his brow. "Fair point. What's wrong with the chair?" "Flat tire. Been stuck here for 20 minutes, and apparently I'm invisible to everyone else walking by." He crouched beside the wheelchair, running his fingers over the rubber. The puncture was obvious, a gash big enough to see through. "Yeah, this ain't rolling anywhere. You got a spare?" She shook her head, a flicker of frustration crossing her face. Didn't exactly plan on breaking down in a monsoon. Bryce stood, brushing his hands on his jeans, though it didn't matter. They were already drenched. "You're gonna catch a cold out here. My garage is a few blocks away. Not a palace, but it's dry. I can patch this up for you." Her gaze lingered on him, searching for something he couldn't guess at. Then she nodded, the movement small but deliberate. "All right, lead the way." He grabbed the handles of the chair, pausing when she tensed. "That okay?" he asked, his tone softer than he meant it to be. "Yeah," she said after a beat. "Just not used to people helping." Bryce pushed the chair through the rain, the wheels sloshing through puddles as they moved. The silence between them wasn't heavy, but it wasn't comfortable either. It was charged, like the air before a lightning strike. He glanced down at her, catching the way her jaw tightened every time they hit a bump. "Name's Bryce, by the way." "Jordan," she replied, her voice almost lost in the storm. "Nice to meet you, Jordan. You from around here?" She didn't answer right away, her fingers curling tighter around the armrests. "Not really. Just passing through." He didn't push. People had their reasons for dodging questions, and he wasn't the type to pry. They reached the garage 5 minutes later, a squat brick building with a rusted sign that read, "Hales Auto." He unlocked the side door and wheeled her inside, the sudden quiet a stark contrast to the chaos outside. The air smelled of oil and metal, and the fluorescent bulbs overhead buzzed faintly as he flipped them on. Jordan glanced around, taking in the cluttered workbenches and the half-disassembled truck in the corner. "You work here?" "Own it," Bryce said, grabbing a towel from a shelf and tossing it to her. "Well, me and the bank. You want coffee? It's shitty, but it's hot." She caught the towel with one hand, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "Shitty coffee sounds perfect." He busied himself with the ancient coffee maker, the machine groaning like it resented being woken up. Jordan dried her face, her movements slow and deliberate, and Bryce couldn't help but notice the way she held herself, graceful, almost regal, despite the soaked clothes and the broken chair. She wasn't what he'd expected when he'd stopped to help. Most people would have been complaining by now, or at least rattled. She just seemed steady. "You're the first person who didn't look at me with pity today," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the hum of the coffee maker. Bryce turned, leaning against the counter as the pot gurgled. "Pity's a waste of time, doesn't fix the tire." Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. Most people don't see it that way. Most people are idiots. He grabbed a toolbox and knelt beside her chair, pulling out a patch kit. "How'd you end up out there, anyway?" "Bad luck," she said, her tone clipped. "Story of my life." He worked in silence for a while, peeling off the ruined tire and setting it aside. The rain pounded the roof, a steady rhythm that filled the gaps between their words. Jordan watched him, her expression unreadable, and Bryce felt the weight of her gaze like a physical thing. He wasn't used to being studied, not like this. "Where are you headed after this?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the repair. "Nowhere special," she said. "Just away." "Sounds like a plan," she laughed, a soft, unexpected sound that made him glance up. "It's not much of one, is it?" "Better than some I've had." He finished patching the tire and reattached it, testing the wheel with a spin. "Good as new." "Well, good enough." Jordan ran her hand over the rubber, her touch light. "Thanks, Bryce. You didn't have to do this." "Yeah, I did." He stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "You need a ride somewhere? My truck's out back." She hesitated, her eyes flickering with something he couldn't place, doubt, maybe, or fear. Then she shook her head. "I'll be fine. You've done enough." He didn't argue, though part of him wanted to. She wheeled herself toward the door, pausing when she reached it. "You're a decent guy, Bryce. Don't let anyone tell you different." Before he could respond, she was gone, disappearing into the rain like she'd never been there. Bryce stood in the doorway, watching the spot where she'd vanished, a strange ache settling in his chest. He didn't know her story, didn't know why she'd been out there alone, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just brushed up against something bigger than a flat tire. Days passed and life slipped back into its usual grind. Bryce threw himself into work, fixing engines, bantering with his part-time mechanic, Danny, and pretending he wasn't scanning the streets every time he stepped outside. Jordan stuck with him, a quiet question mark in the back of his mind. He didn't get it. She'd been grateful but guarded, open but closed off. It didn't add up, and he hated things that didn't add up. On the 5th day, he saw her again. He was cutting through the park near his apartment, a shortcut he took when the shop ran late, when he spotted her near the pond. She was alone, her wheelchair parked under a sprawling oak, her hands folded in her lap as she stared out at the water. The sun was low, painting the scene in gold, and for a second she looked like she belonged somewhere else, somewhere far from this rundown corner of the world. He approached slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel path. "Fancy meeting you here." Jordan turned, her expression shifting from surprise to something softer. "Bryce, didn't expect to see you again. Guess we're both full of surprises." He nodded at the bench beside her. "Mind if I sit?" She gestured with a small wave. "It's a free park." He dropped onto the bench, stretching his legs out. "Haven't seen you around since the rain. Thought you'd moved on." "I did," she said, her voice quiet. Then I came back. Why? She didn't answer right away, her gaze drifting back to the pond. A duck skimmed the surface, leaving ripples in its wake, and Bryce waited, sensing she was working up to something. Finally, she spoke. I used to have everything. Money, a big house, people who pretended to care. Now I prefer nothing. It's simpler. Bryce frowned, turning her words over in his head. Sounds like you're running from something. Maybe I am. She met his eyes, and there was a challenge there, daring him to ask more. What about you? Why'd you help me that night? Didn't think about it, he said honestly. Just seemed like the right thing. She studied him, her lips parting like she wanted to say something, then closing again. The air between them thickened, heavy with unspoken questions. Who was she, really? Why did she talk like someone who'd walked away from a life most people would kill for? And why the hell did he care? You're not like most people, she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. Neither are you, he shot back. She smiled then, a real one, and it hit him harder than it should have. Maybe that's why I'm still here. Bryce leaned back, his mind racing. There was more to her. He could feel it, like a current pulling him under. She wasn't just some drifter with a busted wheelchair. She was a puzzle, one he wasn't sure he should try to solve. But as they sat there, the sun dipping below the horizon, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't ready to let her disappear again. The park grew quiet, the last of the daylight bleeding away, and Jordan shifted in her chair. I should go. Need a hand? He asked, standing. No, she said, her tone firm but not unkind. I've got it. He watched her wheel away, her figure shrinking against the twilight, and that same ache from the garage crept back. She was a stranger, sure, but she didn't feel like one, not anymore. And as he headed home, the question gnawed at him. What was she hiding? Because whatever it was big. Bigger than him, maybe bigger than both of them. What would you have done in Bryce's shoes? Would you help a stranger on a rainy night? Tell us below. The park faded into the dusk as Bryce watched Jordan disappear down the path, her wheelchair cutting a steady line through the gravel. He shoved his hands in his pockets, the cool night air biting at his knuckles, and turned toward home. Her words echoed in his head. I used to have everything. And he couldn't shake the feeling that she'd left a piece of herself behind in that quiet confession. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew he'd see her again. Something told him she wasn't done with this place, or with him. A week later, she was back. He found her at the same spot by the pond, the late afternoon sun glinting off the water. She didn't look surprised when he sat down beside her, just handed him a paper cup of coffee from the cafe across the street. Figured you'd show up eventually, she said, her tone light but her eyes sharp. Guess I'm predictable, Bryce replied, taking a sip. It wasn't the sludge from his garage, smooth, rich, the kind of coffee he'd never buy for himself. This is good. Thought you deserved better than shitty coffee for once, she said, and there it was, that half smile that made his chest tighten. They started meeting like that, unplanned but regular, as if the park had become their unspoken territory. Some days they talked, others they just sat, watching the ducks or the joggers or the way the leaves drifted onto the water. Jordan had a way of pulling him out of himself, her dry humor cutting through his gruff exterior like a blade through rust. One afternoon she caught him off guard with a quip about his truck. That thing's so loud I heard it coming from 3 states away. And he laughed, a deep, unguarded sound he hadn't heard from himself in years. You're trouble, he said, still chuckling as he leaned back on the bench. Me? She raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. I'm harmless. Yeah, right. You've got a mouth on you that could start a bar fight. She grinned, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. Good thing you're not the type to swing. He wasn't, and she knew it. That was the thing about Jordan. She saw him, really saw him, in a way that made him feel exposed but not judged. He didn't treat her like she was fragile, didn't tiptoe around her chair or her silences. And she didn't treat him like some grease-stained nobody who'd never amount to more than a small-town mechanic. They fit, in a way that didn't make sense but didn't need to. One day he convinced her to come to the garage. "You're always hanging around that park," he said as they walked or rolled toward Hale's auto. "Might as well see where I spend my time." She eyed the building skeptically, the chipped paint and oil-stained floor greeting them as he pushed open the door. "This is your kingdom? More like my prison," he said, kicking a stray wrench out of her path. "Come on, I'll show you something." He led her to a workbench where a carburetor sat in pieces, its metal guts spread out like a dissected animal. "Ever worked on an engine?" Jordan tilted her head, studying the mess. "Number looks complicated." "It's not. Just takes patience." He handed her a screwdriver, his fingers brushing hers for a second longer than necessary. "Here, I'll teach you." She took it, her grip steady despite the faint tremor in her hand. He guided her through the steps, loosening bolts, fitting parts together, explaining how the fuel and air danced to keep the whole thing alive. She listened, asked questions, her focus intense but playful. When she tightened the last screw and the carburetor clicked into place, she looked up at him with a grin that lit the whole damn room. "Not bad for a first try," Bryce said, leaning against the bench. "You've got a knack for this." "Maybe I'll take your job," she teased, setting the screwdriver down. "Over my dead body," he shot back. But he was smiling too. They fell into a rhythm after that. Coffee in the park, afternoons in the garage, her hands getting dirtier and her laugh getting louder. She'd poke fun at his taste in music. "What is this, Bryce, a greatest hits of the mullet era?" And he'd fire back about her coffee snobbery. "Not everyone can afford beans from a mountaintop, princess." It was easy, natural, like they'd known each other forever instead of weeks. But there were moments, quiet, fleeting ones, where the cracks showed. One evening, after they'd spent hours rebuilding a fuel pump, Bryce caught her staring at something in her bag. She pulled it out before he could look away. A faded photo of an older man, his face stern but kind, lines etched deep from a life of hard decisions. Jordan's expression shifted, her usual sharpness softening into something raw, unguarded. She didn't say anything, just held the picture for a long moment before tucking it back into her bag. "Who's that?" Bryce asked, keeping his tone casual even as curiosity burned through him. She didn't meet his eyes. "Someone I used to know?" "Used to?" "Yeah." Her voice was flat, final, like a door slamming shut. "He's gone now." He didn't push, though every instinct screamed at him to. Who was the man? A father, a husband, someone who tied into that everything she'd walked away from? The questions piled up, but he let them sit, heavy and unanswered. Jordan wasn't the type to spill her secrets just because you asked nicely, and he wasn't the type to beg. Instead, he handed her a rag to wipe the grease off her hands. "You're getting good at this," he said, nodding at the fuel pump. "Pretty soon you'll be fixing my truck." She smirked, the tension easing from her shoulders. "Maybe I'll just steal it instead." "You'd have to fight me for the keys first." "Bring it on, grease monkey." They laughed, the sound bouncing off the garage walls, but that photo lingered in Bryce's mind like a shadow he couldn't shake. There was a story there, one she wasn't ready to tell, and maybe one he wasn't ready to hear. For now, though, he'd take what she gave him. The banter, the late nights, the way she made him feel like more than just a guy with a wrench. But deep down, he knew it couldn't stay this simple forever. Something was coming, something big, and when it hit, he had no idea if they'd weather it together or if it'd tear them apart. The garage hummed with the clatter of tools as Bryce wiped his hands on a rag, watching Jordan tweak the throttle on an old motorcycle they'd been tinkering with for days. Her focus was razor sharp, her fingers steady despite the grease smudging her knuckles, and when she glanced up with that sly grin, "Think we've got a winner here, Bryce?" He couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. They'd built something together, piece by piece, and it felt good. Too good, maybe. He was starting to rely on her presence, the way she filled the quiet with her quick wit and easy company, and that scared him more than he'd admit. But the world didn't care about good moments. The next morning, as he unlocked the garage, a man in a cheap suit was waiting by the door, holding an envelope that looked too official to be anything but bad news. Bryce took it, his stomach sinking as he read the bold letters. Eviction notice. 60 days to pay up or get out. Back rent he'd been dodging for months, piling up while he kept the shop afloat. The guy didn't stick around to chat, just tipped his hat and left Bryce standing there, the paper trembling in his grip. Jordan rolled in an hour later, her usual coffee in hand, but she stopped short when she saw his face. "What's wrong?" He crumpled the notice and tossed it onto the workbench, turning away to grab a wrench he didn't need. "Nothing. Just business stuff." "Bullshit," she said, wheeling closer. "You look like someone kicked your dog. What is it?" He didn't want to tell her, didn't want her to see him like this, weak and cornered, but she had a way of pulling things out of him. "Landlord's evicting me. Shop's done unless I come up with 6 months' rent by the end of summer." She set the coffee down, her expression shifting to something fierce. "How much?" "Too much," he snapped, harsher than he meant. "Doesn't matter." "It does. I can help, Bryce. Let me—" "No." He cut her off, his voice like steel. "I don't take handouts. Never have, never will." "It's not a handout," she said, her tone matching his. "It's a loan, a favor, whatever you want to call it. You've done enough for me. Let me do this." He shook his head, jaw tight. "I said no, Jordan. Drop it." She didn't push, but her silence was louder than words. The rest of the day dragged on, the air between them thick with tension. She stayed, working on the bike while he tore into a busted radiator like it had personally wronged him. But the ease they'd built was gone, replaced by a wall he didn't know how to climb. He hated it, hated needing anything, hated that she'd seen him crack, even for a second. That night after she left, Bryce stayed late at the garage. The eviction notice sat on the bench, taunting him, and the weight of it all, the shop, the debt, the years of scraping by, crashed down like a tidal wave. He grabbed a beer from the fridge, cracked it open, and sank onto a stool, staring at the motorcycle they'd fixed. His hands shook, not from the cold, and before he could stop it, the dam broke. He pressed his palms to his eyes, breath hitching as the frustration poured out. The door creaked open behind him and he froze, swiping at his face as Jordan's voice cut through the dark. "Forgot my jacket, didn't mean to—" She stopped, her wheelchair rolling to a halt. "Bryce?" He didn't turn, couldn't. "Go home, Jordan." She didn't move. "You're crying." "Fuck off," he muttered, but there was no heat in it, just exhaustion. She wheeled closer, her hand brushing his arm, light but steady. "Talk to me." He wanted to shove her away, to bury it all and pretend she hadn't seen him like this, but the words clawed their way out instead. "I've always been alone, ever since I was a kid. Parents gone, no family, just me. I don't trust easy, never have. People say they'll help, but they don't stick around when it gets hard. I can't—" He choked, shaking his head. "I can't lose this place. It's all I've got." Jordan didn't flinch, didn't pull back. Her hand stayed on his arm, grounding him. "You're not alone anymore," she said, quiet but firm. "I'm here, Bryce. And I'm not going anywhere." He looked at her then, eyes red and raw, and saw something in her face he hadn't before. Resolve, fierce and unshakable. It rattled him. How much he wanted to believe her. But trust didn't come easy. Not for him, and the eviction notice still loomed like a guillotine. "You don't get it," he said, voice rough. "This isn't your fight." "Maybe not," she replied, her gaze steady. "But I'm in it anyway." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just sat there, her hand on his arm, the silence stretching between them. She wasn't offering pity. He knew her well enough to see that. But something else, something he couldn't name. And for the first time in years, he wondered if he'd been wrong to carry it all alone. But the question lingered, sharp and unspoken. Why was she so willing to fight for him? What was she holding back that made her care this much? Because as the night deepened, Bryce couldn't shake the feeling that her past, the one she kept locked away, was about to collide with his present in ways neither of them could predict. Bryce sat in the dim garage, Jordan's hand still resting on his arm, her words, "I'm not going anywhere," hanging in the air like a lifeline he wasn't sure he could grab. The beer bottle sweated in his grip, the eviction notice a crumpled ghost on the workbench, and for a moment he let himself imagine what it'd be like to lean on her, to not face this alone. But the moment passed and he pulled back, scrubbing a hand over his face. "You should go," he said, softer this time. "It's late." Jordan nodded, her expression unreadable, and wheeled toward the door. "See you tomorrow," she said, and then she was gone, leaving him with the echo of her promise and a gnawing sense that he was missing something crucial. The next day, she didn't show. Bryce waited at the park, then the garage, checking his phone like a fool, but there was nothing. No call, no text, just silence. He told himself she'd turn up eventually, that she had her reasons, but by the third day, worry twisted into something sharper. Where the hell was she? He didn't have her number, didn't even know where she lived. How had he let that slide? The open loops of her life, the photo of the man, her vague talk of everything she'd left behind, started to feel less like quirks and more like warnings. Meanwhile, miles away, Jordan rolled through the wrought iron gates of a sprawling estate, the kind of place Bryce wouldn't have believed existed outside movies. The driveway stretched endless, lined with manicured trees, and the house loomed ahead. White stone, towering columns, windows that gleamed like they'd never known dust. Two men in dark suits flanked her, their strides clipped and professional, earpieces glinting as they scanned the grounds. She didn't look at them, her jaw tight, her hands gripping the arms of her chair as if bracing for impact. The front doors swung open and a woman stepped out. Miranda, all sharp cheekbones and sharper eyes, her tailored blazer screaming money. She crossed her arms, her gaze raking over Jordan like she was a problem to be solved. 3 days, Miranda said, her voice ice cold. You vanish for 3 days, no word, no warning. Do you have any idea what's at stake? Jordan didn't flinch. I needed space. Space? Miranda's laugh was a brittle thing, cracking in the air. You don't get space, Jordan. You're not some drifter with a sob story. You're the heir to $1 billion empire, and you will not throw away your legacy for some garage boy. The words hit like a slap, but Jordan's face stayed stone still. His name's Bryce, she said, low and steady, and I'm not throwing anything away. Miranda stepped closer, her heels clicking on the marble steps. You think you can play house with him and it won't cost you. 3 months, 3 months until you turn 30, and this all becomes yours. She gestured to the estate, the guards, the invisible weight of it all. The board's watching. Your father's will is ironclad. You walk away and it's gone. Billions, Jordan, gone to charity or vultures who'll gut it. Is that what you want? Jordan's hands tightened, her knuckles whitening. What I want hasn't mattered in years. Then start caring, Miranda snapped. You've got responsibilities, people depending on you whether you like it or not. That boy doesn't even know who you are, does he? No, Jordan admitted, her voice barely audible. He doesn't. Miranda's lips curled, triumphant. Good, keep it that way. He's a distraction, a liability. You're not his savior, and he's not yours. Jordan looked away, her gaze drifting to the horizon where the city blurred into haze. She thought of Bryce, his rough hands, his quiet strength, the way he'd broken down in front of her without shame. He didn't know her as Jordan Hale, heiress to Hale Industries, a name that carried weight in boardrooms and bank vaults. To him, she was just Jordan, the woman he'd pulled out of the rain. And she'd kept it that way, guarding her secret like a wound she couldn't let him touch. But Miranda was right about one thing. Time was running out. 3 months until her birthday, until the keys to her father's empire, his legacy, landed in her lap. She'd run from it once, after the accident that took her legs and her freedom, after the old man in the photo had died and left her drowning in wealth she didn't want. She'd built a wall between that life and this one, but the cracks were showing, and Bryce was on the other side, tugging at them without even knowing. "Get inside," Miranda said, turning toward the house. "We've got meetings. You can't hide forever." Jordan didn't move right away, her mind racing. She could go back to Bryce, tell him everything, spill the truth about the money, the company, the life she'd fled. But what then? Would he look at her the same? Or would he see a stranger, a rich girl slumming it in his world? Worse, would he shut her out, too proud to let her near his struggles? The eviction notice flashed in her memory, his raw confession. "I've always been alone," and her chest ached. She could fix it, could save his garage with a single phone call, but he'd hate her for it, and she couldn't lose him, not yet. The guards shifted, waiting, and she finally wheeled forward, the estate swallowing her like a gilded cage. But as the doors closed behind her, one thought burned bright. She wasn't ready to let Bryce go, not without a fight, and with 3 months ticking down, she'd have to decide, keep her secret and hold on to him, or risk it all and hope he'd still be there when the truth came crashing down. The estate's heavy doors thudded shut behind Jordan, sealing her in with Miranda's clipped orders and the suffocating hum of wealth. She spent the day in meetings, lawyers droning about trusts, executives eyeing her like a prize horse, every word a reminder of the life she'd tried to outrun. Her mind drifted to Bryce, to the garage, to the way his hands moved over an engine with a certainty she envied. She wanted to be there. Not here, but the clock was ticking. 3 months until her inheritance locked her in for good. She kept her phone close, half expecting a message she knew wouldn't come, and by nightfall she'd made up her mind. She couldn't stay away from him any longer. 2 days later, she found Bryce at the garage, hunched over a busted alternator, grease streaking his forearms. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face when she rolled in. "Thought you'd vanished," he said, his tone gruff but his eyes soft. "Had some things to sort out," she replied, keeping it vague. "You free this weekend?" He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Depends. What's the plan?" "Lake house, couple hours from here. Just us." Bryce raised an eyebrow, a slow grin tugging at his lips. "You trying to kidnap me?" "Maybe," she shot back, her smile matching his. "You in or out?" "In," he said, no hesitation, and something in her chest loosened. They left Friday afternoon, his truck rumbling down a winding road flanked by pines, the city fading into a blur of green. The lake house was old, weathered wood and creaking floors, perched on the edge of a glassy stretch of water. It wasn't hers. She'd borrowed it from a friend who owed her a favor. But it felt like a world apart, a pocket of quiet where the weight of her secret didn't press so hard. Bryce carried their bags inside, dropping them by the door, as he took in the sagging porch and the faded curtains. "Rough around the edges," he said. "I like it." "Thought you might," Jordan replied, wheeling to the window. The sun was dipping low, painting the lake in streaks of gold, and for the first time in days she could breathe. They spent the weekend shedding the tension that had built between them. Bryce grilled steaks on a rusty barbecue, teasing her about her fancy taste when she produced a bottle of wine she'd smuggled along. She laughed, the sound freer than it had been in weeks, and he watched her like he couldn't quite believe she was real. They played cards by lantern light, his competitive streak showing when he accused her of cheating. "You're too good at bluffing, Jordan. It's suspicious." And she fired back, "Maybe you're just bad at reading me." But Saturday night shifted the air. They sat on the porch, the lake lapping softly against the shore, a blanket draped over her lap as the chill settled in. Bryce nursed a beer, his shoulder brushing hers, and the silence wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with things unsaid. She felt his eyes on her, steady and searching, and something in her cracked open. "I wasn't always like this," she said, her voice low, her gaze fixed on the water. "The chair, I mean. It happened 5 years ago. Plane crash." He turned to her, setting the bottle down. "What happened?" "Private jet. Me, my dad, a couple of his business partners. Storm came out of nowhere. Pilot couldn't keep it steady. We went down hard." She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of the blanket. "I was the only one who walked away, or didn't walk, I guess. Broke my spine. Dad didn't make it." Bryce didn't say anything, just listened, his hand resting near hers on the armrest. She kept going, the words spilling out like they'd been waiting too long. "He was everything to me. Tough, brilliant, built this whole life I was supposed to step into. When he died, it all fell apart. I couldn't handle it. The company, the pressure, the way everyone looked at me like I was broken. So I left." He shifted closer, his voice rough but gentle. "You're not broken, Jordan." She met his eyes, her throat tight. "Feels like it sometimes." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. "Not to me." The moment stretched, fragile and electric, and then he leaned in, his lips brushing hers, soft at first, testing, then deeper when she didn't pull away. She kissed him back, her hand sliding to his neck, the warmth of him chasing out the cold she'd carried for years. When they parted, breathless, he didn't let go, just rested his forehead against hers. "Come inside," he murmured, and she nodded, her heart pounding in a way that felt dangerous and right. The bedroom was small, the bed creaking under his weight as he sat beside her. He helped her out of the chair, his hands careful but sure, and when she lay back, he didn't rush, didn't treat her like glass. He kissed her again, slow and deep, his fingers trailing along her arm, then lower, finding the hem of her shirt. She tensed when he lifted it, exposing the scars that snaked across her legs, jagged lines from the crash, reminders she hated looking at. "Bryce," she started, but he shook his head, his eyes locked on hers. "You're beautiful," he said, and before she could argue, he bent down, pressing his lips to the first scar, then the next, his touch reverent. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known." Her breath caught, a shiver running through her as he kissed his way up her leg, his hands steady on her hips. She reached for him, pulling him closer, and for once she let herself feel it. Love, real and raw, washing over her like a tide. His shirt hit the floor, then hers, and they moved together, skin to skin, the world narrowing to just them. He whispered her name against her neck, his voice breaking with something deeper than want, and she clung to him, letting herself be held, be seen, be loved in a way she hadn't thought possible. After, they lay tangled in the sheets, her head on his chest, his heartbeat steady under her ear. She traced circles on his skin, her mind quiet for the first time in months, but the secret still lingered, a shadow at the edge of this perfect moment. He didn't know who she was, not fully, and with her birthday looming, she wondered how long she could keep it that way. Bryce's arm tightened around her, protective, and she closed her eyes, wishing she could freeze time. Because when the truth came out, and it would, nothing would be the same. The lake house lingered in Jordan's memory as they drove back to the city, the taste of Bryce's kisses still on her lips, the warmth of his hands etched into her skin. They'd left the weekend behind, but it clung to them. Hours of laughter, quiet confessions, and a closeness that felt like a tether she couldn't break. Bryce's arm rested on the console between them, his fingers brushing hers every few miles, and she caught him stealing glances, a soft smile tugging at his mouth. For the first time, she let herself imagine a life with him, not the one waiting for her in 3 months, but something smaller, realer, built from moments like this. Back at the garage, life picked up its pace. Bryce fought the eviction with every spare hour, haggling with the landlord, taking on extra jobs, while Jordan slipped away when she could, dodging Miranda's calls and the pull of the estate. They stole time together, coffee runs, late nights over engines, her teasing him about his stubborn pride, him firing back about her mysterious disappearances. "You're a ghost sometimes," he'd say, half joking, and she'd deflect with a laugh, the truth a knot in her chest. Weeks blurred by, the days growing shorter, her birthday inching closer. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Bryce found her at the park, their old spot by the pond. He looked different. Nervous, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his usual steady calm fraying at the edges. She wheeled closer, tilting her head. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said, too quick, then laughed. A rough, shaky sound. "Number, I mean. Damn it, Jordan. I've been trying to figure out how to do this right." "Do what?" Her heart stuttered, a wild hope flaring before she could tamp it down. He pulled his hand from his pocket, revealing a small scuffed box. Pawnshop velvet, worn but sturdy, and when he opened it, a simple ring glinted inside, silver unpolished, a single tiny stone catching the fading light. He dropped to one knee right there on the gravel, his eyes locked on hers. "I don't have much," he started, his voice low, raw. "This place might be gone in a month, and I'm not some guy who can give you the world. But I love you, Jordan. I've never felt this before, not with anyone. Marry me. Please." Her breath caught, tears springing to her eyes as the weight of it hit her. His honesty, his vulnerability, the ring he'd probably scraped every penny to buy. She saw the lake house, the garage, the nights he'd held her like she was enough, and the tears spilled over, hot and fast. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Bryce." He slid the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling, and she pulled him up, kissing him through the tears, her arms wrapping around his neck. He laughed against her lips, relief and joy mixing in the sound, and for a moment, the world was just them, the pond, the ring, the promise. She clung to him, the metal cool against her skin, and let herself believe it could be this simple, this pure. But as they sat there, her head on his shoulder, the secret pulsed beneath her joy. He didn't know about the estate, the billions, the life she'd have to claim in weeks. She'd said yes to him, to this. But what would he say when he learned the truth? The ring felt heavier now, a question as much as a vow, and she buried her face in his jacket, willing the moment to last. "Do you believe love should be simple or grand? Would you say yes to a humble proposal if the love was real?" The park faded into memory as Bryce and Jordan held each other by the pond, the pawnshop ring glinting on her finger, sealing a promise that felt unbreakable. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind, planning a small wedding, just them and a handful of friends, no fuss, no frills. Jordan insisted on keeping it simple, her eyes bright with a quiet joy that matched his own, and Bryce didn't question it. He was too caught up in her laugh, her touch, the way she made the garage feel like home, even as the eviction deadline loomed. They set the date for a crisp Saturday, 2 weeks before her birthday, and he didn't notice the tension creeping into her silences, the way she'd stare at her phone like it might bite. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold, the little chapel on the edge of town draped in soft light. Bryce stood at the altar in a borrowed suit, his hands fidgeting with the cuffs, grinning like a fool as Jordan rolled down the aisle in a plain white dress that hugged her frame. She looked radiant, her eyes locked on his, and when they said their vows, "I take you for better or worse, no matter what comes," he meant every word. The kiss was electric, sealing them together, and for a moment it was perfect. Then the doors banged open and chaos spilled in. Cameras flashed, voices shouted, a swarm of strangers in dark jackets shoving their way into the chapel. "Jordan, over here!" "Miss Marlowe, a statement." Bryce blinked, his arms still around her, confusion crashing over him like a wave. "Paparazzi, here?" He turned to her, his brow furrowing. "What the hell's going on?" Her face paled, her hands tightening on his, and before he could process it, she pulled him aside, away from the lenses, her voice low and urgent. "Bryce, I need to tell you something. Now." "Tell me what?" His stomach twisted, the joy of minutes ago curdling into dread. She took a breath, her eyes searching his. "I'm not just Jordan, I'm Jordan Marlowe. My father was Daniel Marlowe. He built Marlowe Enterprises. I'm his heir. In 2 weeks, I inherit everything. Billions, Bryce. I didn't tell you because I wanted you to love me for me, not my last name." The words hit him like a punch, knocking the air from his lungs. You're Jordan Marlowe, the billionaire's daughter." He stepped back, his hands dropping to his sides, the ring on her finger suddenly foreign. "This whole time, you've been lying?" "No," she said, desperate, reaching for him. "I never lied. I just didn't tell you. I left that life, Bryce. I ran from it. You're the first real thing I've had since." He stared at her, the chapel spinning, the shouts of the paparazzi a dull roar in his ears. "Real? You let me propose with a damn pawnshop ring while you're sitting on billions. You let me beg for scraps to save my shop when you could have." He stopped, shaking his head, the betrayal sinking in. "I don't even know who you are." "Bryce, please," she whispered, tears brimming. "I'm still me. This doesn't change us." But it did, and he couldn't unsee it. The gulf between them, the secrets she'd kept. He turned away, the crowd parting as he stormed out, needing air, needing space, needing anything but her pleading eyes. Days later, he was back at the garage, the wedding band heavy in his pocket, when a sleek black car pulled up. A man stepped out. Rowan Blackwood, all polished shoes and predator's smile, his name vaguely familiar from news headlines about Marlowe Enterprises. Bryce tensed as Rowan approached, his voice smooth as oil. "Bryce Hale, right? Congratulations on the nuptials. Quite the catch you landed." "What do you want?" Bryce snapped, wiping grease from his hands. Rowan leaned against the workbench, casual but deliberate. "To talk. You're in over your head, son. Jordan's family. They're not what they seem. They're using you, you know. A pawn in their game. Marlowe's board needed her married, settled, to lock in the inheritance. You're the perfect sob story, poor mechanic, heart of gold. Makes her look good." Bryce's jaw tightened, doubt flickering like a spark. "You don't know shit about us." "Don't I?" Rowan smirked, pulling a folder from his coat and tossing it onto the bench. Photos spilled out. Jordan at the estate with Miranda, with men in suits, all dated before the wedding. "She's been playing you from the start. You think she'd slum it here without an angle? Wake up, Bryce. You're a means to an end." He wanted to punch the guy, to throw the folder in his face and call him a liar, but the seed was planted. Bryce stared at the photos, his mind reeling. Her disappearances, her evasions, the way she'd pushed for a quick wedding. Was it real? Any of it? The lake house, the vows, the nights she'd held him. Had it all been a setup? He thought of her tears at the chapel, her voice breaking as she'd said yes, and he didn't know what to believe anymore. Rowan straightened, brushing off his sleeve. Think about it. You don't have to be their puppet. Walk away while you still can. As the car peeled out, Bryce sank onto a stool, the folder open in front of him, Jordan's face staring back from glossy prints. He loved her, he did. But the doubt gnawed at him, sharp and relentless. Had she chosen him, or had she used him? And if it was the latter, how the hell was he supposed to live with that? Bryce sat in the garage, the folder of photos scattered across the workbench, Rowan Blackwood's words looping in his head like a broken engine he couldn't fix. The images burned, Jordan with suits, with Miranda, with a life he'd never been part of. He wanted to believe her, wanted to cling to the woman who'd laughed with him at the lake house, who'd said yes with tears in her eyes. But the doubt was a blade cutting deeper with every unanswered question. He'd married her thinking they were equals, two people against the world, and now he felt like a fool, a prop in some billionaire's game. The wedding band sat in his pocket, a weight he couldn't bear to look at, and by morning he'd made up his mind. He found her at the park, their spot by the pond, the air crisp and heavy with the promise of winter. She looked up as he approached, hope flickering in her eyes, but it died when she saw his face. Bryce. I can't do this, he said, his voice rough, final. You lied to me, Jordan. Not just about who you are, about us. I don't know what's real anymore. It's all real, she pleaded, wheeling closer, her hands reaching for his. I love you. I didn't tell you because I was scared you'd look at me like this. Like what? He snapped, stepping back. Like some idiot who didn't see he was being played? Your family needed you married, and I was convenient. That's what Rowan said. And those pictures... He shook his head, the hurt spilling out. I trusted you. I gave you everything I had, and it wasn't even close to enough. Rowan's a liar, she said, fierce now, tears streaking her face. He's been after my father's company for years. He'll say anything to tear us apart. Bryce, please don't let him win. But the damage was done. He couldn't unsee the photos, couldn't unhear the whispers of manipulation. I need space, he said, turning away. I need to figure out who I am without all this. Bryce, wait. Her voice broke, but he didn't stop, didn't look back. He walked away, the crunch of gravel under his boots drowning out her sobs, his chest tight with a grief he couldn't name. He loved her. God, he loved her, but he couldn't stay, not like this. Days later, Jordan sat alone in the vast dining room of the Marlowe estate, the silence pressing in like a living thing. The mansion stretched around her, marble floors, chandeliers, walls lined with portraits of a family she barely recognized anymore. She'd come back after the park, after Bryce's footsteps faded, because where else could she go? The paparazzi had retreated, the wedding buzz dying down, but the emptiness stayed. Her hands rested on the table, the pawnshop ring glinting dully, and her gaze drifted to a small, grainy photo beside it. An ultrasound, the faint outline of a life she hadn't known about until yesterday. She traced the image with trembling fingers, tears pooling on the polished wood. Pregnant. 2 months along, the doctor had said, conceived in that tender weekend at the lake house when she'd let herself believe they could outrun her past. She'd cried then, alone in the sterile office, and she cried now, the sobs echoing in the cavernous room. Bryce didn't know, couldn't know, not when he'd walked away, not when he thought she'd betrayed him. She wanted to tell him, to run to the garage and lay it all bare. But the fear stopped her cold. What if he saw it as another trick, another reason to doubt her? What if he never came back? The ultrasound blurred through her tears, a tiny, fragile secret in a world of broken trust. She could feel the clock ticking, her birthday days away, the inheritance looming, and now this, a child tying her to Bryce, even as he slipped further out of reach. Would she tell him? Could she risk his rejection again? Or would she carry this alone like she'd carried everything else? And Bryce, would he ever come back? Or had Rowan's poison severed them for good? The questions hung unanswered, heavy as the mansion's silence as Jordan sat there, lost in a future she couldn't see. Jordan sat in the hollow expanse of the Marlowe estate, the ultrasound trembling in her hands, tears staining the table as the reality of her pregnancy settled like a stone. She'd tried to call Bryce once, her finger hovering over his number, but the memory of his back turned at the park stopped her. He was gone, physically, emotionally, and the silence between them stretched wider than the mansion's halls. Her birthday loomed 2 days away, and with it, the inheritance she couldn't escape. She clutched the ring he'd given her, the only anchor to a life she'd almost had, and wondered if she'd ever find the courage to tell him about the baby growing inside her. Meanwhile, Bryce holed up in the garage, the eviction deadline a week past, the landlord's patience fraying. He'd packed half the tools, the truck idling out back, when he found it. A folded letter tucked under a wrench on the workbench, her handwriting jagged but unmistakable. He hesitated, his thumb brushing the edge, then opened it, the words hitting him like a freight train. "Bryce, I don't know if you'll ever see this. I wrote it after the lake house, before the wedding, when I thought I could keep you without losing myself. I'm not who you think. Not just the girl in the chair, not just the one you saved in the rain. I'm Jordan Marlowe, and I've been running from that name since my dad died. I didn't tell you because I was afraid you'd stop seeing me, the real me, and only see the money, the mess, the things I hate about myself. I love you, more than I've ever loved anyone, and I'm sorry I let that scare me into silence. If you're reading this, I hope it's not too late." The letter shook in his hands, dated weeks ago, before the paparazzi, before Rowan, before he'd walked away. She hadn't sent it, hadn't trusted him with it, and that cut deeper than the lies. He sank onto a stool, rereading her words, the rawness of them clawing at the walls he'd built. Had he been wrong? Had he let doubt drown out the truth he'd felt every time she'd touched him? The door creaked open, and he looked up to see Franklin, his old mechanic buddy, gray-haired and gruff, who'd known him since he was a kid scrapping cars for cash. Franklin leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "Heard you're packing up. Thought you'd fight harder for this place." Bryce folded the letter, shoving it into his pocket. "Fight's over. Lost the shop. Lost her." Franklin snorted, stepping inside. "Bull, you didn't lose Jordan. You threw her away. And don't give me that betrayed look. I dug around after you told me about that Blackwood bastard. He's been gunning for Marlowe Enterprises since Daniel died, spread lies, greased palms, anything to destabilize her claim. Those photos? Staged or stolen? He played you, Bryce, and you bought it." Bryce's jaw tightened, the folder Rowan had left flashing in his mind. "She still hid it from me. Billionaires don't marry grease monkeys unless there's an angle." Franklin shook his head, his voice cutting through the haze. "You're not scared of her money, Bryce. You're scared of being loved right. She didn't tell you because she didn't want you to feel small. She wanted you to feel enough. And you were, till you let pride and that snake Rowan tell you different." The words landed hard, stripping away the excuses Bryce had clung to. He thought of the letter, of her tears at the park, of the way she'd looked at him at the lake house, like he was her whole damn world. Franklin was right. He'd been running, not from her wealth, but from the vulnerability of letting her in, of believing she could want him without strings. Rowan had twisted that fear, but the betrayal wasn't hers. It was his, for doubting her when she'd given him everything she could. "Where is she?" Bryce asked, standing, his voice steady for the first time in days. "Estate," Franklin said. "Heard she's been there since you left. Tomorrow's her birthday. Big day for her, whether she likes it or not." Bryce grabbed his keys, the letter burning in his pocket. He'd been a fool, but maybe not a lost one. Not yet. He had to see her, had to know if the love in those words was still there, if he could fix what he'd broken. As he climbed into the truck, Franklin called after him, "Don't screw this up twice, kid." Bryce didn't answer, just peeled out, the road to the estate stretching ahead like a lifeline he wasn't sure he deserved. Bryce's truck roared down the highway, the letter Jordan had written crumpled in his pocket, its words searing into him with every mile. Franklin's voice echoed in his head, "You're scared of being loved, right?" And the truth of it gnawed at him, raw and unrelenting. He'd let Rowan's lies and his own pride tear him from the one person who'd seen him, really seen him, and now he was racing against time to make it right. The Marlowe estate loomed in his mind, a fortress of wealth and secrets. But he didn't care about that anymore, only her. It was her birthday tomorrow, the day she'd inherit everything, and he needed to reach her before she slipped further out of his grasp. He hit the estate's gates at dusk, tires screeching as he braked hard. The guards eyed him warily, their hands hovering near holsters, but before he could demand entry, Miranda stepped out, her sharp gaze cutting through the twilight. "She's not here," she said, her tone clipped. "You're too late." "Where is she?" Bryce demanded, stepping out of the truck, his voice rough with desperation. Miranda crossed her arms, studying him like he was a puzzle she didn't care to solve. "Hospital. Complications. She went into labor this morning." The word labor hit him like a sledgehammer, stealing his breath. "Labor? She's pregnant?" "Was," Miranda corrected, her expression softening just a fraction. "She didn't tell you, did she?" "Figures. She's been a mess since you left, barely holding it together. If you're going, go now. St. Mary's downtown." Bryce didn't wait for more. He was back in the truck in seconds, the engine roaring as he peeled out, his mind a storm of shock and guilt. Pregnant. A baby. His baby. And she'd carried it alone, through his betrayal, through the silence he'd left her in. The ultrasound she'd stared at in the mansion, the tears he hadn't understood. It all clicked, and the weight of it crushed him. He'd walked away when she'd needed him most, and now she was in a hospital bed, fighting for their child, while he'd been licking wounds he'd inflicted on himself. The city blurred past, streetlights streaking into lines as he pushed the truck to its limit. St. Mary's loomed ahead, a squat brick building glowing against the night, and he parked crookedly, bolting through the doors. The reception desk was a haze of white coats and clipped voices, but he barked her name, Jordan Marlowe, and a nurse pointed him to the maternity ward, her eyes widening at his urgency. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his boots pounding the linoleum, until he reached the labor wing, the air thick with antiseptic and quiet tension. A doctor stopped him at the double doors, her face calm but firm. "You're the father?" "Yeah," he said, breathless, the word feeling both foreign and right. "Bryce Hale. Is she okay? The baby? She's in delivery now. Early labor, stress maybe, or just bad timing. We're doing everything we can. You can go in, but keep it steady. She needs that." He nodded, pushing past the doors, his heart hammering as he scanned the rooms. Then he saw her, Jordan, in a bed at the end of the hall, her face pale and slick with sweat, her hands gripping the rails as a contraction hit. Nurses flanked her, their voices low and urgent, but she looked up and their eyes locked. For a moment the world stopped. Just her, just him, the unspoken months of pain and love crashing between them. "Bryce." Her voice cracked, disbelief and relief warring in it. He crossed the room in 3 strides, dropping to her side, his hand finding hers. "I'm here," he said, his throat tight. "I'm so damn sorry, Jordan. I found your letter. I know everything. I was wrong, so wrong, and I—" She squeezed his hand, cutting him off, as another contraction rolled through her, her breath hitching. "You're here now," she gasped, tears spilling down her cheeks. "That's what matters." He held her gaze, his own eyes burning, and brushed the damp hair from her forehead. "I left once. I swear I'll never leave again." She nodded, a sob breaking free, and he stayed, his hand locked in hers as the nurses coached her through the next push. Time blurred, minutes, maybe hours, of her gripping him, her cries sharp and fierce, his voice steady as he whispered, "You've got this. You're so strong." He didn't let go, didn't falter, even as his own fear clawed at him. This was their fight now, together, and he'd be damned if he lost her again. Then a wail pierced the room, a high, trembling sound that stopped his heart. The doctor lifted a tiny, squirming bundle, pink and perfect, and placed her in Jordan's arms. "It's a girl," she said, smiling faintly. "Healthy, strong." Jordan's breath shuddered as she looked down at their daughter, her tears falling onto the baby's soft head. Bryce leaned in, his arm around them both, staring at the little face. Wide eyes, a tuft of dark hair, a piece of them he hadn't known he'd made. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Like her mom." Jordan laughed, weak but real, and met his eyes. "You're staying." "Forever," he said, pressing his forehead to hers, the baby warm between them. "I love you, Jordan. Both of you." She reached up, her hand trembling as she touched his face, and they stayed like that. A family forged in the chaos of doubt and redemption. The room settled, the nurses stepping back, and Bryce held her hand tighter, the weight of the past lifting as their daughter's tiny fingers curled around his thumb. Hours later, they lay together in the quiet of the recovery room. The baby, named Lily, after Jordan's favorite flower, sleeping in a crib beside them. Jordan's head rested on his shoulder, her breathing even, and Bryce traced the lines of her face, memorizing this moment. He'd almost lost it, lost them, because he'd let fear drive him, let Rowan's poison convince him love couldn't be real. But it was, here in this room, in the weight of Lily's tiny body, in the way Jordan had fought for them even when he hadn't. "You knew," he said softly, breaking the silence, "about the baby, back at the mansion." She nodded, her eyes drifting to Lily. "Found out after you left. I didn't know how to tell you, not when you thought I'd used you. I was scared you'd hate me more." "I could never hate you," he said, fierce and low. "I hated myself for not seeing it, how much you were carrying, how much you gave me. Franklin set me straight. Rowan, he twisted everything. I should have trusted you." She turned to him, her gaze steady despite the exhaustion. "We're here now. That's enough." He kissed her forehead, lingering there, and felt the truth settle in his bones. Love wasn't the money, the estate, the lies he'd feared. It was this, raw and simple, a second chance he'd almost thrown away. Lily stirred, a soft whimper escaping her, and Jordan smiled, reaching for her. Bryce lifted the baby instead, cradling her against his chest, marveling at how small she was, how real. "Happy birthday," he murmured to Jordan, the clock ticking past midnight. She'd turned 30 in this room, inherited her father's empire, but it was this, them, that mattered. She laughed, tears brimming again. "Best gift I've ever gotten." They sat there, the 3 of them, as the hospital hummed around them, a new beginning stitched from the ashes of the old. Bryce knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, her wealth, his pride, the world waiting to judge. But he'd face it with her, for Lily. He'd made a decision out of fear once, and it had nearly cost him everything. Now, love was the answer, and he'd hold it tight no matter what came next. Have you ever made a decision out of fear, only to realize love was the answer all along? Share your experience. Bryce cradled Lily against his chest in the hospital room, her tiny breaths syncing with Jordan's as they leaned into each other, the weight of their reunion settling like a balm over old wounds. The night stretched on, quiet and sacred, with Jordan's hand in his and their daughter between them, a fragile, perfect tether. Her birthday had come and gone, the inheritance hers now, but as she'd whispered, "Best gift I've ever gotten," Bryce knew the empire she'd claimed wasn't the one that mattered. They'd found something truer here, in the hum of the hospital, and he vowed to build on it, step by step, no matter what the future threw at them. Months later, the world had shifted beneath their feet, again, but this time together. Bryce stood in a sprawling garage, not the cramped, rusted Hales auto he'd lost, but a bright, open space buzzing with life. The sign above read, Hales Haven, a non-profit he'd dreamed up in the sleepless nights after Lily's birth. A place to teach foster kids the trade that had saved him, funded by a quiet partnership with Marlowe Industries. He'd fought the idea at first, bristling at the thought of her money bailing him out, but Jordan had pushed back, her voice firm. "It's not charity, Bryce. It's us, doing something real." He'd relented, and now, watching a lanky teenager tighten a bolt under his guidance, he felt a purpose he hadn't known he'd been chasing. Jordan rolled up beside him, Lily in her arms, 6 months old now, her dark eyes wide and curious as she tugged at her mother's necklace. The garage clattered around them, wrenches clinking, kids laughing, the hum of an engine being tested. But here, in this pocket of chaos, it was just them. Bryce glanced down, his hand brushing Lily's soft hair, then Jordan's cheek, and she smiled, that same smile from the lake house that still knocked him sideways. "This," Jordan said, her voice low, steady, "this is all I ever wanted. Not boardrooms, not press. Just this." He nodded, his throat tight, and leaned down to kiss her forehead, then Lily's. "Me too," he murmured. "You and her, and this place. It's enough." She tilted her head, resting it against his arm, and they watched the kids work, a dozen futures taking shape under their roof. The past, her secrets, his doubts, the storm of their separation, felt distant now, not gone, but softened, a scar they'd learned to live with. Marlowe Industries loomed in the background, a machine she'd tamed with Miranda's help. But it wasn't her life. This was Bryce beside her, Lily in her lap, the garage alive with second chances. One of the kids, a wiry girl named Mia, called out, "Bryce, check this!" She held up a carburetor, grinning, and he crossed the floor, Jordan following with Lily. "Nice job," he said, clapping Mia's shoulder. "You're a natural." "Learned from the best," she shot back, and Jordan laughed, the sound weaving through the noise like sunlight. They stayed late, locking up after the last kid left, the garage quieting into a hum of satisfaction. Bryce lifted Lily from Jordan's arms, her sleepy weight a comfort as they headed to the truck. The night was clear, stars sharp above, and he paused, looking at his wife, his partner, his everything. "We did good, huh?" "Yeah," she said, her hand finding his. "We did." Back home, they tucked Lily into her crib, her soft snores filling the small house they'd bought together. No mansion, no estate, just a place that felt like theirs. Bryce pulled Jordan close on the couch, her head on his chest, and they sat in the stillness, the journey from that rainy night to this one circling back in his mind. It hadn't been easy. Trust rebuilt, humility earned, love fought for. But it was theirs, full circle, a life carved from the raw edges of who they'd been. And that, Story Family, was a tale of raw love, hidden identity, and the power of choosing the heart over fortune. From a roadside rescue to a hospital reunion, Bryce and Jordan found their way through betrayal, doubt, and redemption. Not with grand gestures, but with the quiet strength of two people who refuse to let go. Hale's Haven stands as their legacy, a testament to love that builds, not breaks, and a little girl named Lily who ties it all together. What lesson did this story teach you the most? Was it trust, humility, or the strength to love without fear? Let us know in the comments, and if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell. Until next time, stay kind, stay real, and keep believing in true love.